My name is Cora Grayson. I'm 56, and I really thought I'd seen it all. But nothing, not even my 3 botched presentations to the board, not even a 3-day meeting in an unventilated basement in Atlanta, could have prepared me for the lunch where I was handed a severance package and a bill for the salad. We were sitting in the same restaurant on the corner of Main and Hayworth, where we used to celebrate big contracts. I chose the lentil soup. He had a turkey sandwich. And right in the middle of his second piece of turkey, he looked up and said, "I think it's time to change our approach to leadership. We need new energy. Younger. You know what I mean?" I'm not kidding. Those were his exact words. No emotion, no pause, not even an apology. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't know what to say. I just didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing my reaction. There was something predatory in his gaze, as if I was no longer alive, but simply an obstacle that needed to be removed from his path. I stood up, silently. I just took my bag, left the bill on the table, and left. I didn't even remember my umbrella. Rain was pouring down on the city, but I walked slowly. I didn't hide. It was as if it wasn't me who had just been thrown out of the company I had given 19 years of my life to. 19 years. That's almost a third of my life. The same thought kept running through my head. Do they really think they can get rid of me just like that? And, funny to say, I remembered one small detail. There was a mistake in their strategic matrix, which I personally helped to develop. It's still there, and I'm the only one who knows where it is. It didn't mean anything. Until today. The next morning, I came to the office. Not as an employee, as a ghost. No one objected. No one said anything. And I walked through the corridors as if for the last time. For the first time in years, I looked at everything through the eyes of a stranger. And then I got scared. Not for myself. For them. Because I remembered that the data management system I had created from scratch was complex, multi-layered. And if you touched it without knowing what you were doing, everything would go haywire. There was a section I had never documented, because I didn't need to. I was the one who kept everything in my head. In the evening, I opened my old laptop, the one that still had all my personal notes, and I found something I once considered trivial. But now it looked like a mechanism for the complete collapse of their analytics. No, I wasn't planning revenge. I wanted to remember if I still had any power over anything in this world. And it turned out I did. "Mom, what are you doing?" my daughter asked when she saw me at my laptop in the middle of the night. "Writing a list," I replied. "A list?" Things they don't know. The list was long. And with each line, I felt something coming back. Not anger. No. Respect. For myself. For my work. For my experience. Because no matter how much they talk about fresh blood, there is knowledge that cannot be passed on, only accumulated. And I realized that I still had a choice. I could leave. I could forget. Or I could stay in the shadows and watch them try to keep the ship afloat, unaware that it was sinking. On Monday, they will start reassigning my duties. And that's when it will begin. They called me Miss Logistics. But not out loud. Out loud it was, "Cora, could you check that again?" "Cora, what's going on with the train?" "Cora, our terminal is frozen. Can you help?" And I always could. Not because I'm a magician. It was because I remembered. Details, dates, contracts, delivery routes that were created before modern CRM existed. I remembered how in 2009 we lost our supply chain with Denver because of a snowstorm, and how Eric and I worked out a detour route, manually, in Excel. That detour was then entered into the system as the standard protocol for northern instability. But the name was mine. The idea was mine, too. I remembered how we spent the night in the office with 2 guys from the tech department when everything went down due to a router failure. They are now somewhere at Amazon or Microsoft, and I stayed. Because I was needed. Until Friday. On Monday, my duties were to be handed over to a new, temporary project coordinator. I had seen him, with his nice haircut, new phone, and a look that seemed to scan the room for KPIs. He walked over to my old desk with my USB drive. He turned on the monitor and froze. I stood there, pretending to be passing by. He looked at me, didn't recognize me, They never really notice you until you say something. But I kept quiet. He needed access to my work templates, but they didn't exist. At least not in the form he expected. Everything I had created over the years had a logic that had to be felt. It wasn't obvious. It was a strategy, not a set of instructions. Do you have backup data for the period from 2014 to 2016? He asked Maria from IT. That was the local version of Cora. We couldn't find the keys, she replied. Local version of Cora. Sounds nice. You could put it on a mug. At home, I opened a folder I had named back in 2015, DEBG Host. It contained my private archives, route overload models, risk matrices for southern regions, scenarios in case of port blockades. Nothing secret, just mine. Everything that should have been transferred had not been transferred. And not because I hid anything. It's because no one asked. But even if they had asked, what exactly would they have asked for? They don't know what they're looking for. I opened the file, port_shift_triage_V2. It was a diagram I had developed after we were nearly fined for a disruption in Houston. On the third page was a detour route through Galveston that saved the company $470,000 a quarter. None of the new coordinators even know where that port is on a map. I drank my tea, put my old pen on the table, and smiled. Not maliciously, just weirdly. All these years, I thought I was just working. But it turns out I was building something much more important. I wasn't part of the company. I was its memory, and now they're left without a memory. On Tuesday morning, I received the first call. It was an internal number. I didn't answer. A minute later, I received a message. Cora, it's Maria. Everything's frozen. The system won't let us access the transport reports. Can you advise us on where to start? I read the message while sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a warm blanket over my shoulders. The radio was on, whispering about yet another transportation reform, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a hurry. They started distributing my responsibilities. Officially, I was temporarily transferred to the logistics support team. This meant that 6 different people, who had no common habit of being systematic, were now trying to keep track of my containers, routes, schedules, and forecasts. It was like they were trying to put together a puzzle without knowing that the picture was supposed to be a city, not a forest. The reporting fell apart on the very first day. Someone sent me a screenshot on Telegram, a formula error in the summary dashboard. It was my hybrid formula, which I had manually inserted in 2018 after the analytics started giving incorrect forecasts due to inconsistencies in the data templates from the southern region. No one understood the formula, but it worked. Until today. Then there was the story of the missing cars. I saw a post in the internal chat. Does anyone know where the cars from Reynosi have gone? They should have been on the road since yesterday. They're listed in the records, but they're not on GPS. I knew. I had even seen this glitch before. There is a delay between the API tracker and the registration on the gateway. It happens just when the detour routes are activated. If you don't manually press the synchronize button, the system thinks the cars have disappeared. I've been pressing that button manually for years. They didn't even know it existed. On Thursday, I got a call from Sandra, the project office manager, with whom we once spent the night in a warehouse when there was a malfunction in the north terminal. Cora, sorry to bother you. The panel with the southern hubs is going down. They say that shipments are not being processed. It may be related to the system. My presence or absence? I asked calmly. She paused. I don't know. Can you just take a look? Even if it's just a quick glance. I'm not a company employee, Sandro. But you're the only one who understands how it all works. I didn't agree, but I didn't refuse either, because then I saw it for the first time. They themselves understood that it wasn't just people who had left. The algorithm had left, packaged not in code, but in intuition. In habit, in years of practice that cannot be reassigned. I felt the end approaching, and as strange as it sounds, I felt a little sorry for them. They really tried, but no one warned them that instead of a coordinator, they were left with an empty field. On Friday morning, I received a letter, an informal one, from Tommy, the same coordinator with the nice hair and poor understanding of Excel. Hey, Cor, I was asked to review your previous projects. Everything is a little more complicated than we thought. Can we talk if you have time? I exhaled. Finally, they had come to their senses. Not out of respect, but out of fear. I didn't reply right away. I opened my old laptop and found a file I had labeled, "Mistake that will never show up." Back in 2017, I noticed a discrepancy in the forecast volume calculations for the Memphis terminal. It was a minor issue, a 1% difference. However, over time, it could have skewed the model so much that we would have started losing money. I manually corrected the formula, but not where I should have. Not in the main template, but in a workaround module that activated automatically when the figures deviated by more than 2%. It was my own emergency brake. It wasn't in the documentation, because it wasn't supposed to be. I didn't want anyone to accidentally touch it. It had been silent for 7 years, and now it was gone. They replaced the template, and Memphis reported a 38% increase in the forecast volume. It looked like growth, and they were pleased. On Monday, the entire structure supporting these increased volumes began to crack. They opened new routes, hired additional drivers, and a week later began receiving fines for underloading. I knew what would happen next. Supplier refusals, cash flow shortages, rating downgrades, and all because of a formula. Because of one formula that sat there quietly, like a guard, and didn't scream until it was taken out of the game. I called Sandra, for the first time, on my own. "Have you seen the Memphis report?" I asked, without saying hello. "Yes, I have. Something's wrong, but everyone says it's progress." "It's not progress, it's fake growth. They've had an accident." "Is it because of the formulas?" "It's because formulas without context are dangerous." She was silent. "Can you just take a look?" I agreed. Not because they deserved it, but because it was going to get worse. And someone had to know how to put out the fire while there was still water. I logged into the system as a consultant, formally, with guest access. And in 5 minutes, I saw that it wasn't just Memphis. The entire model's event correction mechanism had broken down. It sounds complicated, but in simple terms, the system no longer understood when to stop. It's like a car that thinks every red light is a reason to speed up. I restored one template, I applied the old logic, and I downloaded the report. Then I logged out of the system. I knew he was already in shock. Instead of growth, there was overload. The next morning, the CEO himself called me, the same one who ate turkey and told me it was time to make room for younger people. "Cora, good morning. Can we meet?" "What, lunch again?" He didn't laugh, neither did I. We didn't meet in the office, or in a restaurant. He invited me to a meeting room in a new center where the company had just opened an innovation hub. Glass walls, fresh wood, everything in the style of, "We are looking to the future." I sat down opposite him, like someone who sees not the future, but the consequences. "Cora," he began, with that forced friendliness that managers put on when they want something. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I understand that the situation with the forecast has become complicated. We didn't expect it." "Because you didn't know what to look for," I replied simply. He nodded, briefly, without trying to argue. "We're reviewing the structure. We have an idea to bring you back. As a strategic consultant, flexible format, no pressure. No status, no team, no access, no authority," I added. "But with responsibility?" Silence. "Actually, I'm not offended. I'm not interested in revenge. But I will never return to a building where my name was erased in a single day, and my folder with 12 years of work was simply archived." "It wasn't personal," he said. "It was about a culture change." "And what is culture? People? Respect? Consistency?" Because all I saw were presentations and words like adaptability and fresh breath. I didn't need to shout. I didn't even raise my voice. "So what do you want?" he asked. And at that moment I realized we weren't playing come back. We were playing new rules. I opened my bag. I took out a folder. I put it on the table. "This is a diagram. It works. It has formulas. It has logic. It has explanations. It's yours. But only on one condition. I'm not coming back as an employee. I'll work as an independent systems architect. You won't change the structure without my approval. You won't adapt processes without explanation. And you'll credit me for what I've created." He took the sheets. He looked through a few pages. And for the first time ever, I saw something like respect in his eyes. Or fear. "You did all this? Alongside your main job?" "No, this was my main job. You just didn't see it." We said goodbye without shaking hands. I went outside and breathed in the fresh air. It was raining again, but this time I had an umbrella. And a clear understanding I was no longer in their space, but they were in mine. The first week passed quietly. I didn't rush. I kept quiet and didn't ask what was going on in my former office, as if I didn't exist. I am not a mirror that reflects everything around me. I am a foundation, and it is invisible. But as soon as it is removed, everything collapses. 8 days passed when the first letter arrived, from a young analyst named Tommy. We didn't know each other, but he wrote sincerely and simply, "Miss Grayson, I'm working with a template from your old structure. There is a section labeled L.layer.kg. I don't understand what it means. Can you explain?" I smiled as I read it. L.layer is a logical layer. KG are my initials. I signed it that way because, among the numerous layer 1, 2, 3, I needed a more flexible marker. It was my shadow zone, my know-how, which should not be touched without understanding. Without it, the system would collapse. I replied concisely, without condescension, explaining the basics. This layer is very unstable. It relies on contextual meaning. Without understanding the source, logical errors appear, even though the system outputs flawless numbers. The response was, "Understood, thank you. It's a shame I didn't work with you earlier." It was a small thing, but it left a deep impression, because memory is not just corporate meetings or presentations. It's also other people's notes in your formulas. I logged into the internal portal to take a look, not as a former employee, but as an architect. In the core frameworks section, I found my first notes, the code, outdated and imperfect, but alive and working. Underneath were comments from strangers. One of the new managers wrote, "This is an outdated format, but it's stable. Can we adapt it to the new standards?" And the manager replied, "Don't touch it for now. That's Corey's logic. No one wants to risk making predictions." I closed my eyes, not out of pride, but out of respect. Because the best revenge is not a blow, but a system that people are afraid to break. In the evening, my daughter Kira came in with tea. "Anything new?" she asked. "Yes, they're afraid to break what I've created." "And you?" "I'm not afraid to leave a mark." I wasn't surprised that they didn't call. They hoped that I would panic, that I would call first and offer help. But the phone remained silent, and I remained silent too. It was a strange balance, silence that spoke louder than any email. That Monday, I made myself coffee as usual. I put the cup on the windowsill, leaned back in my chair, and looked at the list. I decided to change my strategy. Not to go in head-on, but to observe how they would be without me. What would change? Who would panic first? By lunchtime, I had received 2 messages. One was from a colleague who didn't know I'd been fired yet. "Cora, your forecast file won't open. Can you check it, please?" The second was from a former subordinate. "I think something went wrong with the new dashboard. Do you have the old version saved?" I didn't respond. I just made a note. Day 1. Error in the connection between modules. They were trying to build a new system on top of one they didn't even fully understand. It was like building an attic on a roof without checking the foundation. The next day, Alex, one of the analysts I still trusted, called me. His voice was tense, but he tried to sound calm. "Cora, I know you're no longer with the company, but do you happen to remember which script was responsible for stitching together client streams with inventory data?" I paused. It lasted just long enough for him to realize what I was thinking. "No, Alex," I said calmly, "but if I remember, I'll let you know." "Thanks," he whispered, and added, "It's really starting to fall apart. They don't know how to hold it together." That evening, I opened my old backups, not because I wanted to restore anything, but to make sure once again that what I had created was more complex than it seemed. The system we had been building for years had layers: logistics, forecasts, risk analysis, adaptive indicators. And all of this was based on invisible things, variables that only made sense to me. Like gray dot tide, the name of a variable I introduced after deaths in my family. It regulated seasonal slumps. No one asked why it was called that. And I didn't explain, because it was my memory and my code. On Wednesday, I received an email with the subject line, "Urgent imbalance in quarterly forecast." I smiled, not an angry smile, more like the smile of someone who had been warned. I got up, made some tea, sat down at my desk, and started writing a letter, not to the company, to one person whom I once trusted more than I should have, Helen Montgomery, former director of operations. Now she consults for startups. We hadn't spoken in a long time, but she knew what I was capable of, and that I don't play with emotions, only systems. "Hi, Helen. I don't know if you're interested, but I've been fired. The reason is new leadership. Ironic, isn't it? I have something that might interest you. It's related to supply chain analytics. If you have 20 minutes, I'll tell you how ignoring experience ends. Cora." I pressed send and exhaled. At that moment, I realized that I didn't have to prove anything, but I could make them realize what they had lost. No shouting, no public war. Just let the system speak for me. Red alerts flashed on the screen. Forecast sync is not responding. Q3 report unavailable. CRM analytics. Upload error. They didn't immediately understand what was going on, but this was the very part, the gray module, that I had never written into the documentation, the one that kept the whole model afloat. At first, Jackson tried to blame the IT department, then HR. Then he started looking for the human factor, but he didn't know that this human factor had a name, and a surname, and a list. A few days later, I got a call. Not an official one, just an old colleague, Travis, who hadn't lost his conscience yet. "Cora, I don't know if you did something, but it's a mess here. Jackson is panicking. He's mumbling something about restoring versions, but nothing works." "What does he want?" He's looking for outside consultants, but he can't find anyone who understands the system." I smiled, vaguely, without malice, just like a person who had been waiting for this moment not for revenge, but for confirmation. "Yes, you still matter." That evening, I activated my second profile. A pseudonym, a new logo, an independent analytical consulting group. Graybridge Analytics. I knew he wouldn't figure it out right away. The next morning, I sent a standard commercial offer. Formal, dry, no hint of acquaintance, just business. I offered a technical audit with an outside perspective on the problem. A few hours later, the reply came. "Thank you for your prompt response. When can you join a call?" "I'm available tomorrow at 9 a.m., I wrote. "Please send me the access details." At 9 o'clock, I turned on my camera. The shadow of my face, a neutral background, no signs of identity. Jackson didn't recognize me. His voice was tense, strained. "We've lost several important reports," he explained. "The forecasting has stopped working. We need to resolve this quickly. Our investors are waiting for an update." I nodded. I spoke in a lower, slightly hollow voice throughout the call, keeping myself in a neutral position. "I'll look into it within 48 hours. You'll need to isolate the servers while we investigate." "Will that be expensive?" "It's reasonable." By the third day, I had a plan. I deliberately made part of the recovery more complicated so that they would need further support. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go to save themselves. That evening, Travis texted me, "Cora, did you see this? Jackson said he brought in a specialized European firm." "But I recognized the logo. That's you, right?" I didn't respond for a long time. Then I wrote simply, "It doesn't matter. What matters is that the system works." I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted them to pay, not with money, with attention, with awareness, with that uncomfortable, slow silence that comes when you realize you've devalued the wrong person. At first, it looked like a regular letter, one of those that get lost among corporate spam. Request for counterparty verification. But it wasn't sent by someone from the back office. The sender was the company's legal director. Subject: Graybridge Analytics. Confirmation of license and beneficiaries. I froze for a second. My throat went dry. The letter was dry, standard, without even a hint of aggression. But between the lines, I heard one thing. They suspected something. They had started digging. And somewhere, perhaps, someone was already holding documents with my name on them. I didn't panic. I just sat down. And sat there for about 10 minutes, until my tea was finished. Then, unexpectedly, I got up, took an old leather notebook out of the drawer, the same one I had kept since my 15th year on the job. I opened the page marked, Core Architecture, Personal, Do Not Duplicate. On this page is the core, literally, a description of the part of the analytical system that I once left on manual control, without documentation, without a backup copy, without advice, only verbally, to myself. That was the irony. They fired me, thinking they had gotten rid of a cog, but they left behind a time bomb, without instructions. In the evening, I opened my old ThinkPad and started creating a separate file. I named it simply, disclosure_final_draft. There I laid out everything, the stages of creation, the mistakes they made, the exact date the structure was violated, the name of the employee who accidentally deleted the backup template. I left a comment. This mistake is not their fault. They weren't trained. It wasn't a revenge file. It was an insurance policy. If I got fired, I would have a document that would set the record straight. The next morning, I received another letter. But this time, it was personal. It was from Ellie, a girl I had hired as an intern. Cora, you don't have to respond, but are you Graybridge? If so, just know that we're not all on their side. I stared at those words and swallowed something more than emotions. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't sympathy. It was confirmation that you still exist, that your story still matters to someone. I replied simply, Graybridge isn't me. It's the part of me that hasn't given up yet. In the evening, Jackson called. It was the same tone again. Let's hurry. But this time he sounded tense. His sentences were choppy, his face hard. The audit has begun. They're forcing us to give them full access to our internal tools, and Graybridge is also being audited. We need to see who's there. You signed the contract. All the terms are there. I know, but now it's beyond my authority. I nodded and said, all the answers are in the system. You just need to know where to look. He paused. Is that a threat? It's advice, Jackson. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, completely silent, but there was only one thought in my head. Either you show up yourself, or you'll be turned in. I opened the window. I watched as the city slowly fell silent, and I knew that my voice would soon be heard again, but not in the conference room, in documents that would change the rules of the game. After her dismissal, Cora does not disappear. She documents the chaos in the system that triggers her undocumented code and notices that the management team is losing control. She shows up as an independent consultant at a tender attended by her former colleagues and sees the cracks in the foundation of what they wanted to modernize without her. Story. The press secretary nervously adjusts his badge. The room is silent except for the clicking of keys and muffled conversations. On the big screen is the Westport Logistics logo, and below it, Third Wave Solutions presentation. I am sitting in the second row, not on stage, not as an expert, just a listener. But the badge on my chest says, Lane Strategies, and that means I don't belong here. They don't see me right away. Joel is standing by the flip chart. His shirt is wrinkled, and he forgets to switch slides twice. He talks about innovations that sound strangely familiar, because they are mine. A presentation I wrote years ago, but without my data, without depth, without details, just the surface. And that surface is now cracking. How do you resolve discrepancies in reporting between segments? Someone in the audience asks. Pause. Joel blinks. He starts to answer, but immediately gets confused. It seems that the system is still being adapted, he says. Do you mean that the forecast model is not valid? Another participant clarifies. I stand up. The movement is quiet but noticeable. Excuse me, I say. I can comment on that. Joel's face turns white. Someone from Westport leans forward slightly. And I know. This is the moment to speak clearly. The model you are trying to demonstrate was designed as a multi-level model. It does not work without access to a closed data layer. I say calmly. That is why you have conflicts between segments. This is an expected failure. I am asked to stay after the session. A committee representative approaches me. Miss Grayson, we haven't seen your name in a while. Are you still consulting? I smile. Uncertainly, but sincerely. Depends who for. In the evening, I find an invitation to a meeting with an analytical group in my mailbox. Not from the Halley Group, from another company. The one that listened silently today. I don't write to Carver or Joel. No loud letters, no exposés, just silence. And an offer they'll read tomorrow, in the list of participants in the new tender, under a new name. Next to it, a description of the methodology, the same one, but now protected.